Well, I'm Richard Fabry. I was really inspired to invite these two people. I am always attracted to people who have great moral courage, who go against the tides, and both of them did 180 degrees in their lives at one point or another to get where they are right now. Cassie Jaye is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. She's been a filmmaker for about 10 years. This is her third movie, The Red Pill. She started out as a feminist, and she found out about the men's rights movement, and she was going to expose that they were obviously misogynist guys with an agenda. But Cassie, being the person she is with her great character, she approached the project with an open mind and an open heart. And once many feminists got wind of this, because the feminists were funding her film initially, they took the money away, so she had to raise the rest of it online. And there's a lot more detail I can give you, but if you want to find out more, go on her website, theredpillmovie.com, and her Jaybird Productions. Warren Farrell, I mean, he's the father of the men's rights movement. He's been at it for decades. He's the only male who's been on the board of directors of the National Association of Women for 3 years. And during that time, he went around the country. He made a fairly good living extolling the virtues of the feminist movement. But he started observing the leaders of the feminist movement up close and personal, and he started noticing inconsistencies and hypocrisies and started thinking for himself. And so he started to, when his speeches, he changed what he was saying, and pretty soon his speaking gigs somewhat dried up. And then around 1993, he came out, and he was writing books before that, with the landmark book, The Myth of Male Power. And I could keep on going on about Warren Farrell, but I don't want to take up any more of your time. And if you want to learn more about Warren Farrell, there's a very huge wiki page on him, and he's been around. And I'm very indebted for all the insights. And also, since we live in a media-saturated world, Cassie's movie is going to definitely be a breakthrough movie. You'll see a lot of people who are also going to be making movies about men's rights. And she started it by showing her vulnerability. You know, she wasn't trying to be funny or satirical. She was just being herself and real. And we really appreciate it. Yes. All right.
Does everyone silence their cell phones? Please turn off your cell phones. So first off, I want to thank the Institute of Noetic Sciences for inviting me to speak here. And Family Favors, thank you so much. It's a real honor. I've only been here, I think, once before with Glenn. He took me out to the labyrinth up on the hill, and it was just a really magical experience. So it's so nice to be here today. And I would also like to thank my friends who have shown up to offer moral support, and Dr. Warren Farrell for gracing us with his presence, and Mr. Evan Davies for being by my side this entire time. And as Warren spilled the beans, last week we got engaged, and Evan got down on one knee, asked, "Would you be my wife?" And I tearfully said, "You didn't bring me tissues?" Before I said yes, because I was already a bawling mess. But I'm so glad that we could do this today, and I've been stuck in work mode with the Red Pill movie, and this is the first time I'm ever really getting to share my story outside the film. So it's nice to meet all of you and have you introduce yourselves, because I think this is a really open group to hearing what I've prepared. So we'll just jump right in. I'm inspired by people. I'm inspired by stories. People sharing their life experiences, the lessons they've learned, how they've grown from those experiences, and the wisdom that's sprouted from those often difficult and challenging times. Are you inspired by people and by stories? I would think so. so, or you wouldn't be here today. Would you say you are open to listening to anyone's story? Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, let's put it to the test. I am going to take you on a thought experiment. So please close your eyes. Thank you, no peeking. And think of a person or a type of person who you would never want to be in the same room with. Is it a certain politician that you dislike with a passion? Is it someone in history who did the most heinous crime you could think of? Is it someone from your past who made you feel so small? If you can't think of anyone, think of something you strongly believe, and then think of someone who believes the opposite. Now imagine you're in a room with that person. Feel their energy. Now think about how you are feeling right now. Are you feeling yourself clench up? Is it getting harder to breathe? I actually begin to sense the blood flowing through my veins, which is a common physiological response to anxiety. It's not a good feeling, is it? And that's why we try to avoid feeling this way. We don't want to be in the same room with people like that. Them. That's a dangerous word. Them. But for the sake of this thought experiment, I'm going to make you imagine it. So keep your eyes closed. And imagine you're in a room with this person, and they're telling you their life story. What made them who they are, the best time and the worst time in their life. Maybe you didn't even ask them, they're just telling you. What a narcissist, right? Now look at yourself. What are you doing? Are you really listening? Or are you identifying the exit doors, planning your escape route? Are you storing arguments in your head for when you finally get the opportunity to respond?
Yes.
You're waiting for your chance to tell them off, tell them how horrible they are and how they're so wrong. If that's how you're feeling, would you say you are learning new information or you are resisting new information? You can open your eyes now. If you're resisting new information, why? What do you fear learning? If you're in that position of hearing your enemy tell their story and you're resisting everything, it will be an extremely uncomfortable experience. But if you're in that position and you let go of your defenses, you accept where you are, you decide to listen, to understand, it will no longer be suffocating. It'll almost certainly be enlightening what you learn. Why are you resisting that being your experience? Your greatest fear can't be confirming that they're an awful person, because you already know that. That's already part of who you are. So perhaps your greatest fear is finding out you have something in common, that you could relate to them on some crazy level. Or worse yet, you find out that you like them. Ha! That would never happen in a million years, you're thinking, right? But what if it did? So what if it did? It's a thought experiment. Why are you so attached to your assumptions? What about your life would change if you no longer saw them as your enemy? In 2013, I decided to meet my enemies. I was a 27-year-old award-winning filmmaker and a proud feminist, and I was determined to expose the dark underbelly of the men's rights movement. For 1 year, I traveled North America, meeting the leaders and the followers of the men's rights movement, and I spent anywhere from 2 to 4, 6, sometimes up to 8 hours filming each individual person. I filmed 44 people. And there's an important rule in documentary filmmaking. As an interviewer, you do not interrupt. So I'm asking men's rights activists, MRAs, questions. And I'm getting long answers, their full life story. And it's important to note that for many of these people, they'd never been interviewed before. But they've also, many of them, had never been asked, what's your story? What makes you who you are? And so it's just pouring out of them. So months and months and months of this goes by. And in the moment, I didn't realize it. But now looking back, I can see that while I was conducting my interviews, I wasn't actually listening. I was hearing them speak. I knew the camera was recording. But in that moment of sitting across from my enemy, I wasn't listening. What was I doing? I was anticipating. I was waiting to hear a sentence, or even just a couple of words in succession, that proved what I wanted to believe, that I had found the misogynist, the ground zero of the war on women. A couple of moments I thought I had it. There was one men's rights activist that said, just walk outside and look around. Everything you see was built by a man. His statement felt anti-women. I felt my jaw clench. If I were with my friends, I would have delivered a sassy, "Oh, really?" as a warning that a rant worthy of a mic drop and a bow was fast approaching. But I sat quietly, as a documentarian should, while removing all the space between my upper and lower molars. After a year of filming, I was reviewing the 100 plus hours of footage I had gathered, replaying and transcribing it, which, believe me when I say, no one will ever listen to you more than someone who transcribes your words. Write that down. So I was transcribing, which meant I was replaying the footage over and over again, getting every word meticulously. And I realized that my initial knee-jerk reactions to certain statements weren't warranted, and my being offended didn't hold up to intense scrutiny. Was that statement about men having built the skyscrapers and the bridges anti-women? What would be the gender reverse scenario? Maybe a feminist saying, just look around. Every person you see was birthed by a woman. It's a powerful statement, and it's true. Is it anti-male? I don't think so. I think it's acknowledging our unique and valued contributions to our society. Luckily, while I was filming The Red Pill, I kept a video diary, which ended up tracking my evolving views. And in looking back on those 37 video diaries that I recorded that year, there was a common theme. I would often hear an innocent and valid point that a men's rights activist would make. But in my head, I would add onto their statement a sexist or anti-woman spin, assuming that's what they wanted to say, but didn't. So here are 3 examples. A men's rights activist would say, there are over 2,000 domestic violence shelters for women in the US, and only 1 for men. Yet multiple studies show that men are just as likely to be abused by an intimate partner. I would hear them say, we don't need 2,000 shelters for women. They're lying about being abused. It's all a scam. But looking back on all the footage I gathered of men's rights activists talking about shelters, and all the blogs they've written, and all the video live streams that they've posted on YouTube, they never say that. All they say is that men are abused too and deserve care and compassion. So example number 2. Men's rights activists would say, where is justice for the man who was falsely accused of raping a woman, and because of this accusation, he loses his college scholarship and is branded with the inescapable title of rapist? I would hear, a woman being raped isn't a big deal. It's as if I didn't hear the word falsely accused of rape. I only heard he was accused of rape. Of course, rape is a big deal, and all the men's rights activists agreed it is a horrible thing to happen to anyone. And I eventually realized that what they're saying is they're trying to add to the gender equality discussion. Who is standing up for the good-hearted, honorable man who loses his college scholarship or his job, or worse yet, his children, because he was accused of something he absolutely did not do? Third example. A men's rights activist would say, female genital mutilation is outlawed in most countries throughout the world. Yet infant male genital mutilation, also known as circumcision, is routinely practiced and rarely questioned. I would honestly think they said, female genital mutilation should be legal too. This is so far beyond what they said. Why was I doing this? I was assuming the absolute worst in them because I thought they were my enemy. Eventually, I couldn't keep denying the points that they were making. These are real issues. But in an effort to avoid agreeing with them completely, I changed from putting words in their mouth to acknowledging these issues, but insisting it's a woman's issue. So here are some examples of how that would go. A men's rights activist, MRA, would say, men are more likely to lose their child in a custody battle. I would conclude, because women are unfairly expected to be the caretaker, it's discrimination against women that women get custody more often. An MRA would say, on average, men die 5 years sooner than women. And I would conclude, for those 5 years, women have to live alone and fend for themselves in their vulnerable elderly state. An MRA would say, 99% of all war deaths are men. And I would say, I would say, women couldn't even serve in combat positions until recently, so combat deaths throughout history have been a reflection of discrimination against women. Last example. You don't like me back then. Last example. An MRA would say, men are 80% of all suicides throughout the world. And I would say, but women attempt suicide more often. Ha! Ha! It's not a contest, but I was making it into one. Every men's rights issue that they would bring up, I would have a counter of how it's actually a woman's issue. But here's what I later realized. There's nothing wrong with considering what women go through. But why couldn't I simply admit, accept, and have compassion for men's issues without jumping at the opportunity to insist that women are the real victims? So rewind back to 2013. I vividly remember reading Warren Farrell's book, The Myth of Male Power. I was only about 2 months into filming The Red Pill, and on page 70 of his book, this is what he wrote. Hold on. So this is page 70 of his book. During the Civil War, the government passed a conscription act allowing in essence for an all-male slave trade. More than 500,000 men, 623,026 men were killed in the Civil War, the equivalent of 11 Vietnam Wars. Try to imagine 11 Vietnam Wars in a row in which only females are drafted, in which 620,000 female soldiers, your sister, your mother, your daughter, arrived home in body bags. For a second, my mind's eye saw it. And then I was in a ring. And then I was enraged. How dare he ask me to feel the emotional impact of seeing 620,000 women and girls' dead bodies lined up side by side as far as the eye can see. How dare he ask me to imagine that sight? I seriously thought this 2 months into filming. And when my inflamed rage started to simmer, I had 3 options. Either continue reading, which began to feel like a masochistic effort, no offense.
No problem.
Or I could forget about it entirely and move on to something new, watch a reality show, read a Jezebel article, scan Pinterest. Or I could sit with my thoughts and really analyze not only what Warren is saying, but why I am feeling the way I am. And I think that's what you're asking. While making the red pill, I couldn't abandon my emotions. I had to examine them in order to complete this film with a thorough understanding of what men's rights activists are saying and what the average person is thinking. Because as a documentary filmmaker, I take it on as my responsibility to grasp a topic so fully and deeply as I can, and I have to be immersed in that world, learning from the experts who have spent decades researching and honing how they deliver this information. And then I have to go back to where my innocent mind was before I began researching this topic, because that's my audience. I have to know what they can absorb in a 2-hour film, and I have to decide what's the most important information the audience can take away when they leave that movie theater or turn off the TV. In the grand scheme of making the red pill, it didn't take me long to realize that men's issues need compassion. It took me a few months. But when I got it, I got it. These are human rights issues that uniquely or disproportionately affect men. Paternity fraud uniquely affects men. The United States Selective Service, in the case of a draft, still uniquely affects men. Workplace deaths disproportionately affect men. War deaths, overwhelmingly men. Suicide, overwhelmingly men. Sentencing disparity. Life expectancy. Child custody, child support, false rape allegations, criminal court bias, misandry, failure to launch, boys falling behind in education, homelessness, veterans issues, infant male genital mutilation, pregnancy entrapment, lack of parental choice once a child is conceived, lack of resources and compassion for male victims of domestic violence. So many issues that are heartbreaking if you are the victim or you love someone who is the victim of any of these issues. These are men's issues, and most people can't name one because we believe that men have all the power, they have all the rights. But these issues deserve to be acknowledged. They deserve care and attention and motivation for solutions. Accepting that these are human rights issues only took me a few months. But there was something far more difficult for me to face. If you start to humanize your enemy, you in turn may be dehumanized by your community. And that's what happened to me. One of the most difficult parts of making the red pill was screening it and publicizing it. With all of my previous films, the screening tour process was always a very positive experience. The message of my first documentary, called Daddy I Do, was to encourage better comprehensive sexual education in schools, to arm kids with the tools to make better choices and to secure a brighter future. And colleges loved my film. Planned Parenthood funded a Northwestern and Alaskan tour of my film, with all travel expenses paid and dinner parties, talking about how much this film can make a real positive difference. With my second feature film, The Right to Love, it was released while gay marriage was still illegal in most states. So the screening tour process was a mixture of love and tears, hopeful tears that one day any person could marry the person they love. As much as I wish I could say the Red Pill screening tour has consisted of me being interviewed about how we can help men and boys in these dire situations, that has not been the case. Almost every interview I've done, I'm asked to defend myself against malicious, slanderous, libelous, defamatory statements that have been made against me, and my 4 minutes on air is stolen by these erroneous claims. It's no secret now that making the Red Pill movie, that after making the Red Pill movie, I no longer call myself a feminist. But it wasn't learning about men's issues that made me part with feminism. It was actually learning about feminism that made me leave feminism. And I know that sounds harsh, especially when you wear that label as your identity. But how could I be a part of a movement that was not willing to listen, that didn't want me to listen, and doesn't want others to listen? You may be thinking, well, that's not my movement. But I say that because there was a calculated smear campaign against me, and my film has been censored and pulled from multiple theaters, all because I listened and allowed other people the opportunity to listen. If I could give advice to anyone and to our society at large, we have to stop expecting to be offended. And instead, we have to start truly, openly, and sincerely listening. That will lead to a greater understanding of ourselves and others, having compassion for one another, working together towards solutions because we are all in this together. And once we do that, we can finally heal from the inside out. But it has to start with listening. Thank you for listening. 4 years.
As I was listening to you, it just brought me through the whole really valley of internal tears. The journey that I went through was very, very similar to yours. Because I was on the board of the National Organization for Women in New York City and speaking all around the world on women's issues and the importance of women's issues. And the first time I did a TV show where I started showing some empathy for men, I was on with Gloria Steinem, and she had just talked with me about speaking together with her to YPO, the Young President's Organization, as we were lining up a sort of future together in that respect. And she said. She said that men earn a lot more than women do for the same work. And I said, well, it is true that men earn a lot more than women do, but it's not really for the same work. The pay gap is not about men versus women, it's about moms versus dads. And when men and women become fathers and mothers, it is the fathers who put a great deal more time and effort into the workplace in the hope that they can be able to support their family, and women they work just as hard, but they divide their labor between the children and the workplace, and therefore in the workplace they don't earn as much. And I was going to explain that 40% of women who are married, who have children, do not work outside the home at all during those first 5 years. 40% work full-time outside the home, but they cut their hours back, and 20% do some combination of both. But before I could say that, Gloria just gave a signal, like this type of signal, to the producer. And the producer said, we should break for commercial. And then the segment was never aired. I had been invited to that program. This was my 9th time for a national show, I was never. And so Gloria never called me back. I finally sent her a phone from Toys R Us to call me back because I thought maybe the humor would break through the ice. And never did she speak with me again until recently. But she was one of, somebody I called one of my better friends, and all of the people who were lined up as people that I integrated my emotional identity with, as you were saying, they were all sort of like, don't touch him anymore. And so my speaking engagements went from, very, very substantial to literally zero in colleges, where all my recommendations were from people who were that way. But people all along the way, people who were I co-founded the National Organization for Changing Men. It was largely a feminist group, and it was, and I was warned again and again. I was not warned that what I was saying was not accurate. I was warned that feminists would not like what I am saying. And to me, and these were academics, people with PhDs. I was saying, you are a PhD and you are telling me not to pay attention to the truth? This is not okay. But the more I heard that reaction, the more in a sense, made me realize that if I don't have the courage to do this, I am not supporting. I was married at the time, but my former wife was earning a good deal of income, and so I did not need to support her or the children. And I was only free to do what I did, not because I'm so enormously wonderful human being, but because I wasn't supporting people who would lose the money that I was making in the process. And so as you're talking, Cassie, I it was making me relive this whole journey of, and when you and I took one of our first walks together, and you were sort of worried about this alienation from people that you really cared about, I said, Cassie, it's going to be worse than you think. It's because, it surprises most moderate women who have lived life rather than lived academia, that there is such resistance to the L word, listening. And so as I began to get more and more into as I began to get more and more into what I was doing, I realized that the biggest issues in the world are not gender issues. The biggest issue in the world is our inability to hear each other. And so I began to do what my passion has been for a good part of the last 15 years, is boys' issues and men's issues and fathers' issues, but also couples communication workshops, where I finally figured out a way of getting around the natural biological propensity to not be able to hear criticism, especially from a loved one, and especially when it's given badly. And of course, all criticism given from a loved one is perceived by the person who hearing it as given badly. And so that has become one of my real understandings of, trying to train people to be able to do what I know I would be able to do in the course of my lifetime, which is to help people at the age of, I had the fortune to talk to Governor Kasich a week or so ago, and said to him, you need to start advocating for first grade, second grade students to be able to learn how to listen. And then for them to be able to, and for not just the students to be able to listen, but once they're taught, that their parents need to be taught at the same time, because otherwise the students will go home and have contempt for their parents who aren't listening the way that they've learned how to listen. And so that this is the work that we need to do in the next 20 years. It doesn't make any difference what side of any issue you're on. There's no hope for Israeli-Palestinian peace. There's no hope for bosses and employees understanding each other. There's no hope for really the world to move to its next evolutionary state until we learn how to listen. So I could... So I was thinking tonight that I could share with you some of the data that I have worked with for the last years, like I did but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because it's there in the book, written a lot better than I can say it. And it's, so if you're interested in what men's issues are, each of those things that Cassie just went through, that's available. But what I can't do in a book is give you a bit of a life experience. So what I'd like to do tonight is to give you a bit of a life experience. And so I'll ask you just to close your eyes with me. I'll ask you to imagine your dad. Imagine your dad having a glint in his eye. Try to think back to a time that he had his glint in his eye. If you never knew your dad, you have an image of who you think your dad might be, so imagine this in relation to that image. If your dad left early in your life, the same thing. Imagine your image. We all have a relationship with our dad, even if we haven't met him. Whatever we think or feel about our dad, that is what is our relationship with our dad. So think about the possibilities of what created that glint in his eye. If you're a little bit older, maybe it was watching your dad play with your children and seeing how carefree he was in the playing with his children. A glint in his eye means he didn't have any agenda. He was just totally happy. He was relaxed and letting go. He wasn't trying to tell you how to do it better, how to be different, how to make yourself a better person. Maybe he had that glint in his eye when he was singing in a chorus or telling a story that everybody in the family had heard before, but the people at the dinner table had not heard before. And suddenly but he knew that every time he told that story, he got respect, he got laughter, he got people paying attention to him. Maybe that created the glint in his eye. Maybe the glint in his eye was created when he was fishing and just came back, or doing yoga if he lived in this area. Maybe the glint in his eye came if he was doing some type of project in the garage, and when he figured it out how to do that, he just felt so proud of himself that he created something that was of his own imagination and creativity. Maybe he had that glint in his eye when he came back from playing golf, when he won at something, when somebody was respecting him, when he was telling a story that showed how good he was at something. Maybe it was when he was writing poetry or doing art. Maybe you saw it when you went through an old album and it was before you were born that he had that glint in his eye. What changed? So I'm asking you just to get a hold of at least one thing that created that glint in his eye. Now I'm going to ask you to imagine what your dad actually did for a living. Think of what he did for a living. If he did more than one thing for a living over the course of your years, think of the thing that he did for a living that helped to earn him the most money to support the family. I'm going to ask you to imagine yourself thinking, maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe he doesn't really, my dad would never have asked, he never would want to respond to this question. Well, I did have somebody come up to me once, you can open your eyes now. I had somebody come up to me once and say, Warren, you did he met me on the street in La Jolla when I lived in San Diego area. And he said, are you Warren Farrell, something like that? And I said, yes, Warren Farrell. And he goes, I did a workshop with you a few months ago, and it was before Father's Day, and I decided to ask this question of my dad, what creates the glint in your eye? And my dad said, God, Jimmy, you're still attending these airy-fairy workshops about what's creating the glint in your eye. This is, you're not going to ever really be able to make it in the world if that's the questions you're asking. The question you need to ask is, what can I do to be responsible? What can I do to earn enough money to support a family? When you start asking questions like that, that's when you'll become a man. And he said, part of me, Warren, was really furious at you because you should have known better than to ask us to ask that question of our dad. And as I was feeling that fury toward you, my dad reached out and he said, do you really want to know what created the glint in my eye? Is this sincere or is this just some workshop thing? And I said, just shocked that he's asking the question, no, Dad, it's really sincere. And my dad sort of stuttered a little bit and he started to cry. And he said, to me, I had never seen my dad cry before except briefly at my mom's funeral. And he said he reached out to me and I was really worried, so I was freaking. And I said, I'm sorry, Dad. And he said, no. He said, I just thought no one would ever care enough to ask. And So what I'm going to be asking you to do in a few moments, or right now actually, is to find someone in the room that you didn't come here with. Hopefully you'll go back with that person, but someone in this room that you didn't come here with, so that you'll get a chance to share different experiences with different people you don't know. I'm going to ask you to get together in groups of 3, not 4, not 2, because I'll be having very specific instructions. And in that group of 3, just stay there for a moment, and I'll give you very specific instructions as to what to share with each other. So just get together in a group of 3. If you can move the chairs around, I don't think you can actually move the chairs around. Hold for a second. I'm going to ask the facilitator, look around to the other 2 people in your group and choose the person to start with who looks the most mentally alert. Ready, get set, go.
I think you're doing all 3 questions.
First question is
And thinking about whose story in the group sort of most touched your heart. Give that a few seconds thought. I'll ask you to point to that person and encourage him or her to raise his or her hand and share the story of what created the glint in his or her dad's eye versus what the person actually did for a profession. If, by the way, the person said had a glint in their eyes, let's say loving sunsets and flying and so on, and your father was a pilot, it would be possible to assume that your father was doing exactly what created the glint in his eye.
Doing a what?
If he loved flying and loved seeing sunsets, and your father was a pilot, it would be possible to assume that that's what created the glint in his eye. And so he was doing just what he wanted to do. But if you pressed your father on the issue, he would first of all probably say, oh, it's just what created the glint in my eye, because that's what men do. But if you pressed him further and asked him to talk about the difference between the glint in his eye, it would not be about following 150 FAA regulations. It would not be leaving at a certain time each day, flying to a certain place, doing the same place over and over again, having to worry about any number of things that he worries about as a pilot. It was the freedom that was creating the glint in his eye, the moment-to-moment choice. So as you're doing just like being responsible for cooking 3 times a day may not create the glint in your eye, even though doing a creative meal once in a while may. So as you're working on sharing what created the glint in your dad's eye versus what he did for a living, don't confuse what it takes to be a professional versus what it takes to be free. Okay, so imagine you, before your first child in your family was born, either you or somebody else, one of your sisters or brothers, and your dad and mom have just realized what creates the glint in your dad's eye. And your dad and mom think, well, she's pregnant and about to have the first baby, and imagine a good discussion that they have, that which would create more reliable income to handle the expenses of all the children that, in fact, they actually did have in your family, and that which created the glint in your dad's eye, not some morphed version of it like pilot, but just doing exactly what created the glint in his eye, versus what your dad actually did for a living. Raise your hand if your parents, with their values and their needs for security in those times, would have chosen what created the glint in your dad's eye. Raise your hand if they would have chosen what your dad did for a living. I'm going to ask you to really open your eyes and just take in the power of what that implies. What that implies is that the money that we make is not about power. the money so we hear constantly, men earn more money, they have more power, as if those two things were the same thing. I'd like to introduce you to the possibility that for the most part, the road to high pay is a toll road.
Say that again, please.
That the road to high pay is a toll road. The higher your pay, the more tolls you're willing to make, the more you're willing to do something for somebody else. And so when a man becomes a father, he starts worrying about, I can't just sell product X or Y in the local area. I have to work my way up now to get a national job selling it nationwide, because nationwide I'll have more money that I'll make. I can't be a teacher, I need to be a principal. I can't be, I cannot speak up to my boss and argue with him or her because I could lose my job, which is going to hurt my family. So the amount of money we make is very frequently the power we forfeit in order to get the power of pay. Pay is about a paradox. The paradox is that we forfeit power to get the power of pay. So what I'm asking you to look at is that the world, historically speaking, as feminists say, was not controlled by a patriarchy that made rules to benefit men at the expense of women, which is what you learn in literally every women's studies class or gender studies class at any major university in the country. And there's no feminist who would argue with me about that being, quote, the truth. But I'm going to challenge that truth tonight. What I'm going to challenge is that the world was not dominated by a patriarchy, the world was dominated by the need to survive. And what you just dealt with in the group, the three of you, in looking at your dad's life, is that your dad, when you were born, or when your oldest brother or sister was born, that is when she or he had to give up the glint in his eye. That's why that man said to Jimmy, you'll grow up and be a man when you stop asking what you want to do and ask what you have to do. Neither our mothers nor our fathers were talking about rights. Maybe our mothers were, but our great-great-grandmothers and our great-great-grandfathers were not talking about rights. They were talking about responsibilities and obligations. Which sex had the responsibilities and obligations? Mothers did and fathers did. Nobody else did. Both sexes had responsibilities and obligations. Women's responsibility and obligation and the social pressure was to be able to have children, and otherwise you wouldn't be considered a female. What did women have to do in order to have children? They had to risk losing their life in childbirth for many, many centuries. And then they spent their entire life sacrificing, so what? So that their children would have fewer sacrifices and a better life than they had. And what did the grandpa and grandfather do? He did the exact same thing. He didn't bear the children, but he learned that his job was to go to war to protect the children that your mom bore, or the great-grandma bore. So his life was at risk literally. Or he learned to work in a coal mine or oil rig or do whatever he needed to do to give up the glint in his eye and do what was not power. What is the definition of power? The definition of power is having the glint in your eye. That's powerful. That's what life's about. That's happiness. That's power. Feeling able to control your own life is power. Not feeling obligated to earn money that somebody else spends while you die sooner. Men have largely learned to define power as feeling obligated to earn money that someone else spends while they die sooner. And we've sold that to men as power. And some of the most intelligent women in the United States call that power. But if I tried to run a women's workshop and say, I'm going to teach all of you to be more empowered, I'm going to teach you how to feel obligated to earn money somebody else will spend while you die sooner, the women would be intelligent enough to kick me out of that workshop before I started.
That's right.
And what I started to learn as I began to look into the dad's glint in his eye is that both our moms and dads forfeited many, many things in their life so that Brendan could have long hair, so that we could all have a chance to come to places like the Noetic Institute that our grandparents couldn't even imagine coming to. I teach at Esalen, where there's this enormous privilege and a lot of entitlement and a great deal of enlightenment also. But almost none of our grandfathers would have had, or grandmothers, would have had the option of being able to go to a place like that. And so I just bless the devotion of our parents to create options for us that they never had for themselves. And what we really should be doing, I believe, is appreciating the contributions that both men and women have made, not having a women's movement blaming men or a men's movement blaming women, but a gender liberation movement, liberating ourselves from the restrictive roles of the past and creating more options and flexible roles for our future. Thank you. Well, Cassie and I have reverse roles here. So I'd love to ask you to sort of ask questions and or make comments, but before you do, just say your name so we can speak to you more as people rather than as lecture object. Just say your name.
My name is Dave. I'm probably going to sound like a dick. I'm kind of worried about it.
Hold for 1 second. I'm probably, David said, going to sound like a dick. Suppose David said, I'm probably going to sound like a cunt. We talk about people screwing up and say they're dicking around. Suppose we said they're vagining around, cunting around. We just so naturally incorporate today negative words that have male identities as a description of what screwing up is about. And so, sorry.
I'm probably going to sound like a cunt.
I don't have to go the other way, but yes.
I
get to decide that.
So what gives me a glint in my eye is critical thought. One of the things, and I am a lawyer, so I am a sort of, I like to push back on things, and I definitely think, sometimes I bitch. Sometimes I'm an asshole, and I find that asshole, for some reason, is a male. You don't really call women assholes. But anyway, that was a detour. I was originally wanting to say, wow, so when the first presenter, I forgot her name, but I also saw it in your film, which, by the way, I'm totally not totally, I'm like 75% with both of you and enjoy you both very much.
He's 25% wrong.
You got 15 minutes, Warren.
Sometimes I'm like, where is the critical thinking here? Who lives according to the glint in their eye, and what does that have to do with patriarchy? I was going to talk about the statistics, because I thought some of the statistics he said, when they say lies, Dan lies, and statistics, I thought some of the statistics he said in the film and in this talk are more misleading than damn lies, even though there's some truth. And I wish I, could had enough time to get to that, but then what you presented, I was just like, really? No one's saying how absurd this is? Nobody lives, I don't have kids, my wife doesn't have kids, nobody lives with a glint in their eye. You're right, we have to survive, and as soon as you're an adult, or as soon as you're not a child, you don't live with a glint in your eye. And in fact, if we lived with a glint in our eye 100% of the time, we wouldn't have a glint in our eye about it anymore, because it would be like a fish in water. But what does that have to do with patriarchy? Whether you're a man or a woman, you don't live with a glint in your eye. And it doesn't defeat the point of the fact that there is patriarchy, just because that's true. You're redefining power in a way that nobody does. So if I say, you're basically saying happiness is power. And I think men have more economic ability to sometimes pursue that glint in their eye. Sometimes, but not always.
Excuse me for a second. What I'll do after each question is ask one or two people to make comments, and then I'll add my perspective and ask Cassie if she wants to add her perspective to that. But Dean, it sounds like you had a perspective.
I was just going to clarify. It's generally universally accepted that the definition of power is the ability to do work. Okay, this is the the physical definition of it in terms of physics.
That's one definition. I don't think that's the definition he's talking about.
Well, certainly it is.
He's saying it's the
Power to provide.
ability to get a glint in
Okay,
your eye.
let's let other people respond to you, and then is Ray, is it?
Roy.
Roy.
So the word that I heard was patriarchy. And to me, a patriarch is someone who takes care of their family. A man who takes care of his family. So a matriarch and a patriarch are the same thing. They're both wanting to take care of their family.
So David, as you're listening, try to do what Cassie was talking about, just sort of not think of your argument as we are trained to do when we're attorneys, because no attorney is able to support his or her family if they are very empathetic to the argument that their opponent is giving. It's one of the reasons why there's an inverse relationship between happiness at home and happiness in an attorney's job. So I'll be asking you now to sort of really focus on Roy and Dean and the other people that will make comments and myself without just sort of arguing it as you're doing it, okay? So Roy, did you finish what you were saying?
I believe that patriarchy is a false narrative.
Mhm.
It's like another way to blame and make someone wrong when it's like the case of mistaken identity.
Mhm. Nice.
The thing that you're naming is not the thing that it actually is.
Mhm. Good, thank you, Roy. And somebody over here, say your name again.
Rich,
Rich.
I invite you to be open to the possibility that some people do live with the glitch in their eye. We are the
Glint in their eye.
We have-
Others do live with the glitch in their eye.
Sometimes the glint is a glitch. But you are a guest of someone here tonight, Mr. Sergio Liu, who exalts the notion of living your passion. He's an incredible manifestation of that. And his influence on me, when I met him 20 years ago, was to get beyond my lawyering and my sense of what it takes to be a human and to live my passion. And I, more than anybody I know, except for maybe some celebrities or some athletes who are the epitome of success in this culture, I have more freedom than I know anybody, and I lived in my car for 42 years, intentionally home free, okay? In a mode that people can't even begin to comprehend, okay? So I invite you to be open to the possibility that male, female, patriarch, matriarch, lawyer, schmoyer, that some people are capable of doing that. And if you'd like to talk with us, how I achieved that, I'd be glad to share with you. But basically, I invite you to be open to the possibility that your premise is wrong.
Sheldon and then Cassie, I'll make comments.
Okay, I'll make this quick. For me, let's see, it was last June. I got to go to UC Irvine and watch my youngest daughter graduate. And one of the questions they asked during that graduation is, I'd like for all the students who is the only kid in the family to ever graduate with a 4-year degree to raise your hand. And my daughter got to raise her hand. That's one of the few times I've ever cried in my life. My mother's death and my daughter getting to raise her hand for that. Power, it comes from what you want to do for yourself. Responsibility comes for what you have to do for society. My power comes from me quitting a job with Aetna Life and Casualty way back in the 80s to sail around the Caribbean for 6 months on a private sailboat. My power now comes from me headed for my private pilot's license. But I still have an obligation to society and to my family. But that's different than the power I get from the things I do for me. We all have that. It's just how you look at it.
Cassie?
I don't quite know what the jumping off point, was it looking at patriarchy and what is power, how we're defining
A little
power?
bit that, and I think saying basically that I really, that the glint in one's eye is not what is realistic. And so where in the world, Warren, are you coming from about that? And that, that patriarchy is still patriarchy, and saying to somebody that they have a glint in their eye, how do those two even coexist together? You know, what the fuck are you saying?
Well, I
What do
think
they
I
have to
could.
do with each other?
I
Exactly.
think something I could add to this thought experiment is when I first saw you do this workshop, there was a YouTube video online that I watched you doing this workshop where we think about what our father's passion was and what he did to provide for the family. And when I first saw that YouTube video in 2013, when I started making the Red Pill movie, back when I was a very strong feminist of 10 years, I was very put off by the workshop. I don't feel that way now. But at that time, I was put off because I kept thinking, well, mothers sacrificed too. They had a glint that they didn't get to live out because they had children. And so I just want to offer that, reflection on my defensiveness back then when I was watching this workshop. And now participating in the workshop is fun. But now I do see it differently, that it's not about saying women don't sacrifice for the family, or that men are the only, victims of having to provide for the family and leave their dreams behind. But it is acknowledging that your father, your brother, your son even is maybe sacrificing for the family that they're planning to have or do have. And they work hard at it. And something that I also really had to humble myself to admit during making the Red Pill was how much my father and my now fiance supported me pursuing the glint in my eye, which is filmmaking. And none of my life's passion career would be possible without my father and my fiance. I keep forgetting fiance, boyfriend, fiance. So, I think we really have to appreciate people like that who sacrifice. And my mom as well. My mom's my best friend. Obviously, I think that should go without saying, but I will say it. She has sacrificed so much for me and my 3 sisters. So I think we just all need to appreciate each other.
Yes. So what I'm saying now, if I were to be in charge of what I would call a gender liberation movement and start this all from the beginning before we had the National Organization for Women and so on, I would be asking us to look at, what are the enormous amounts of sacrifices that both our moms and dads made. I wouldn't create words like patriarchy with a negative connotation to them that ended up becoming sort of a way of blaming men and then saying that everything that women can ask for pretty much anything that they want because it's a system that's stacked against them. To understand the sacrifices that our moms and dads made so that the next generation would have a better life is to understand that both sexes made sacrifices, and therefore words like patriarchy or matriarchy are really words that are not applicable to the process that our mothers and fathers went through. What our mothers and fathers went through was a process of forfeiting the glint in their eye to be able to make our lives better, so that at graduation, Tillman could get the glint in his eye once again when his daughter graduated. And so it was the transfer of glint in the eye from doing the sacrifice and serving so that your children could serve well again. And a child who then took advantage of what you offered and fulfilled it and made his or her life better, that's what created the new glint in the eye. And that's what I want everyone to understand about everyone. Not just one gender to pose with the other. You had your hand raised both before and now.
Yes,
Tell us your name again. Jeannie, right.
Most of us are not from multimillionaires.
Mm-hmm.
When you get up in the upper class, you don't necessarily have to set your glint aside.
That's right.
You can work part of the time.
Yes.
and make millions and then go to the golf course or on your boat or whatever you want and go travel and see every wonderful thing there is to see in the world. My father was a chemist and he worked hard. He was from Switzerland and had a whole different look at America. But he put his aside to raise 4 girls and he did a great job of it. But I think about all the people who come from less fortunate than I was, just middle class. And those glints were smaller and smaller, I think.
Absolutely.
And I think it's an important thing to keep in mind because in America, money is so important. And now that we live in California and it's getting more and more and more important. And how does someone keep that glint in their eye? And so I think I'm feeling like it's secondary.
Yes, let's work with that for a moment. Let's work on the class issue here. When men, who started the women's movement? Was it poor women, middle class women, or middle and upper class women?
CIA.
Well, another way of approaching this, right? So, was it poor women or middle class or middle?
Educated women.
Yes, educated women who were usually upper middle class, and usually a good percentage of them were married. Were they married to poor men who they had to support, or were they married usually to middle class or upper middle class men?
They had the luxury of time to think about it.
I have
They had the
another
luxury to
part.
think about it. Was it?
Yeah.
Another little thing to add. You know, the guys who, women and men who keep the glint in their eyes are artists and musicians. And some of them starve for a portion of their life in order to keep that glint.
There's a reason we call artists starving artists.
Yeah.
And because the more fulfilling the occupation, the less it pays as a rule. And the reason the more fulfilling the occupation, the less it pays is because we tend to need somebody to pick up our garbage at 3 a.m. And so we may pay them enough to be able to be willing to do that more than we need an art historian. And so when you graduate from with an art history degree or a French literature in the 18th century degree, the chances of your making as much of a living, as much as it may fulfill you, are not as great as even if you're a less educated sort of garbage collector. And so and then let's segue that into the feminist movements. A good percentage of the people that were on the board of Now with me and the leading feminists across the country, many of them who were married, those who were straight, and that was most, but that's not at all a negative, but the ones that were straight were usually married to men who earned a significant amount of money that freed them to be able to ask questions and to pursue the glint in their eye. Here was the problem. As they pursued the glint in their eye and they grew as a human being and spiritually, they became very dissatisfied with the lack of communication that they had with their husbands, who were often focused on what they needed to do. Because the qualities it takes to succeed at work are in tension with the qualities it takes to succeed in love. And so these women came back, they went to the psychologist and said, your husband should be able to communicate more openly and vulnerably and express his feelings and so on. Was the psychologist right? Yes, he was right, or she was right. But the woman often became dissatisfied with these men that had created the freedom that allowed them to become dissatisfied with them. And so that led to a large number of divorces. When the divorces occurred, then oftentimes the women got the children, and the men were oftentimes and the children grew up dad deprived. when the children who grew up dad deprived had major problems. They were psychologically less healthy, physically less healthy, academically they did much worse in almost all the areas. They were more likely to be depressed, commit suicide, create crimes, and a whole series of other problems that led to the next generation becoming often a failure to launch, especially if they were boys. Because boys do much worse with broken families than girls do, although both do very badly. And so this was the type of dynamic that we are not looking at because we're so preoccupied with men having privilege and power, rather than saying, here is a dynamic that happened that we're all part of, and we have to work our way around that. And one of the ways we have to work our way around that is to get fathers more involved with the family. We have this enormous resource before the women's movement of all these brilliant and talented women who we weren't using in the corporations. Well, now we have this enormous resource of a lot of potential dads who are yearning to be dads, fighting to be dads, legally suing to be dads, and we're not making use of them. And our boys especially, but our girls and our boys are suffering enormously as a result of not having that type of father involvement and guidance. Why are we not focused on that? Because to a large degree, feminists don't want to focus on children having more father involvement, because that sounds like father's rights, which sounds like something against women and feminism. It's not against women and feminism. It frees women and feminists to be able to focus more on having a balanced life themselves. And so that's this zero-sum game mentality that we've developed over the last 30 years has hurt all of us and needs to change. And we need the leaders and people like this in this room, which is one of the reasons I agreed to speak here, because this is a thoughtful group that is willing to think out of the box, and for the most part has the courage to take leadership positions in relation to this. And thank you, Sergio, for creating that. Yes. Oh, no, you should.
Oh, actually, I think our time is up, no?
Yes, well,
Well, it's a little after 9.
we can go ahead.
Okay, well, I don't have much to say. Well, just thank you so much for all coming today. However you heard about this event, thank you for showing up.
Cassie, before you stop, I want to ask, Cassie has revealed a great deal about the process of making films. And I've occupied this last part here. Are there any of you that have questions for Cassie's filmmaking process? Because I think that would be, for me, that would be fascinating.
Yes.
I don't have a question, but I have a statement, which is to really honor your process and the transparency with which you reveal and your own courage and vulnerability. I want to honor that, because that to me speaks to an evolutionary process that you went through, and that process is completely apparent in the film, and this is what actually helps transform the narrative. So,
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Watching your movie, The Red Pill, you articulated something for me I was feeling that I wasn't able to yet articulate for myself. And I think actually, Warren, I wouldn't have necessarily connected with you because I was shut down to the articulation of it. It was only, I think at this point in time, only you could articulate it that way. Versus, for example, a man wouldn't necessarily be as effective as articulating it. So I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you for articulating something that I was feeling but not yet able to speak. And I think you've opened the door to a larger conversation that we're having here today and other places, I'm sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Huge compliment.
I'd just like to say, Cassie with The Red Pill, if you don't know who Esther Villar is and Erin Pitsy, you have to look those two women up. She has now moved herself into a very nice group of people, because those two women looked at things that connect genders and how we become our own worst enemies. And so coming up with The Red Pill, as I watched that documentary and I thought back to what Esther Villar said in the Manipulated Man, and the work that Erin Pitsey did with Shelters for Women, and then what happened to her when she started talking about men's issues. She's like the phoenix rising out of the fire now. Thank you.
Could you repeat the names of the two people?
Yeah, could you?
Could you repeat the name?
Esther Villar, it's just ESTHERVILLAR. And Erin is ERIN, and I think her last name is spelled PIZZEY. Yeah, Erin.
Say again, P-I-Z what?
PIZZEY, I think is the way she spells it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Do you have another film on the drawing board?
Great question. I wish I knew the answer. I don't know.
Are you going to keep making films?
I want to, yes.
Okay.
And I'm open to any topic, no matter how controversial it is, because when I was making The Red Pill, I had an Oscar-winning producer of documentaries tell me, "You're making the film I wish I could make, but it would be career suicide." So now I feel like I have nothing to lose. I'm fearless in documentary filmmaking because I've already done career suicide. But
If any guy tried to make your movie, it would have been suicide.
Yeah.
Do you crowdsource your funding? How can we help you in that regard?
oh, thank you. I don't know yet how we'll do it. Maybe a crowdfunding campaign again. The reason
That's how you did the Red Pill?
yeah, just like The Red Pill was done, and that was great because I got to keep full creative control.
And
which,
the budget for the film was approximately?
for The Red Pill?
Yeah.
It was about $250,000. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
From some of your bio on the web page that I looked at, if I recall correctly, you mentioned one of the films was both very provocative and evocative, and you received quite a mixture of responses, some of which sounded pretty rough. Knowing some other, in my world, some other filmmakers who are doing important work such as you, they've also incurred some of that treatment. And it took them differing periods of time and different ways to weather that storm and remain undaunted. You seem to have done well in that way, and you seem to be undaunted. Is that true?
I have the strongest support system around me. Just a few really close, family friends that get me through it all. And I feel like if, the rest of the world hates me, I have 5 or 10 core people that are my world. So that's what got me through everything. But yeah, it has been a difficult road. And just last night we had a screening at the University of Sydney where there was a protest against the film and at least one person was arrested. Apparently violence broke out. I don't know more than that. But and I'm going to Australia in a couple weeks, and I've never been there before. And
Is that for the honey badger?
no, it wasn't with honey badgers. It was just a student group that wanted to screen the film on the University of Sydney campus, and
That wanted to what?
that wanted to screen the film on the campus, University of Sydney. And most of our controversy has been, or bannings or petitions, censorship has been in Australia, the UK, and Canada.
Wow.
So the US has been a little quieter. Which,
Well, thanks for your courage and, more importantly, maybe your good work.
I just want to say publicly,
Tom?
I'm Tom Bresnahan. I was a working actor and producer in Hollywood from '86 to 2008. And, you said something earlier, Warren, about how things changed about 30 years ago. And I just want to say to you that the business that I got into and the business I left were completely different. And the films they're making, and particularly, I have a 10-year-old daughter, particularly the way young women act and the scripts and just the hypersexualization and insanity that they're showing to the kids my daughter's age. I'm just so happy that there's someone, you're a very attractive, articulate, intelligent young woman, and you doing this film, and I know you think it's career suicide, things are turning. I know you know Stefan Molyneux and Mike Cernovich, who I know and they're colleagues of mine. Things are changing, things are turning, and people are realizing that, men and women can live together, but it doesn't have to be as insane as it is now. And Hollywood and the media are such a big part of pushing that insanity. And it's people like you that are turning it around. And thanks for your courage. Appreciate it.
Aaron.
Well, trying to keep it very brief. What I started to say earlier, I wanted to clarify because it sounded like I was saying at the very beginning, like reverting things like all women are liars or bad. And that's not at all what I meant. All I meant was the paradigm, the feminist paradigm, which in my experience, in my field of work and what I've experienced so far in my life anyway, I'm 46, is there's a whole lot of this thing of, like even the thing about abuse and rape, always believe women. It's horrible if anybody is abused, as far as I'm concerned. If anybody violates a clearly stated boundary, that's incredibly screwed up. It's not humane. But whether it's a person of a certain gender or ethnicity, if you give somebody the power, the quote moral authority to be believed, some people can actually ingrain that to the point where they actually think they're a victim when they're not. And there are also, unfortunately, a lot who will abuse that power. And they do it, and it happens a lot, more than I think most people realize. That there are a lot of, it's just a fact. This is not me saying women are bad and men are great. There are a lot of men who do bad who are not that conscious either. There are also a lot of women who will manipulate that. Women who also are very popular and in places of power, who will consciously do things because they want a certain experience, but they don't want to be responsible for it. They don't want to be held accountable or seen by society as having done that. And they'll turn around and say, oh no, I didn't do that. Oh, I was abused or I was violated. Or they'll just gossip and they destroy men's lives. They destroy their jobs. Good men who actually, even if we are open, we're doing it because we trust and we care. Or we did nothing. And it happens a lot more than people think. I think this is one of the hugest things, like the open, honest, I think both of you kind of mentioned that. And I totally agree. I think more than anything else, more than sex, more than money, more than power, honesty, in my opinion, is the most fulfilling, healthy, loving thing anybody can do. Just open communication, two-way, not talking at people, or not talking about gossiping about people. Talking openly to understand people. It's the most important thing. And, we divide it by gender because we have certain, it's like male, generally speaking, we have the yang energy. When we abuse power, generally speaking, it tends to be more aggressive, more assertive, more obvious, overt. What's often ignored is that women too have power. It's yin, it's covert, it's by playing the victim in a society that chivalry. What is chivalry? Putting women's feelings and lives first. No, that's not across the board. But generally speaking, that's still what often happens. Anytime you put another human up above or below, we're no longer in truth. It's just we're not seeing clearly. We're not relating clearly. We don't care. We don't love anymore. And that's, take a big breath and come back to the center and say, okay, we're all souls. Whether we believe in reincarnation or not, right now, we're all the same soul at an essence level. Can we let go of all our political agendas or ideologies or associations and treat each other with the same respect and open honesty? The problem is, or the challenge is, that when we're fully honest, we have to admit none of us are perfect. And we've done things, and we also live in a very repressive society that shames a lot of things that are completely and utterly natural. And a lot of us are wrapped up in that, whether it's religion, or whether it's political ideology, or just our own agenda. Okay, anyways, sorry. Going off of that. I just meant to say, I wasn't meaning to say that women are bad and men are great. Either. Just, that's all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to free flow here for a second. I've been thinking a lot about the power or the detriment of labels, and how I thought men's rights activists were my enemy because I was a feminist, and I thought men's rights activists were the enemy of feminists. And something that I just realized is when you all introduced who you were, I don't recall anyone saying, I'm a feminist or men's rights activist. I don't recall anyone saying I'm a Democrat or a liberal or a Republican, conservative. And I love that we're here looking and hearing each other as people, as individuals. Hello, my name is Cassie. That's my label. Just call me Cassie. And I think that's where we need to be headed. And the nuance in that is where unity grows, rather than this black and white, you're wrong, I'm right, war. So I haven't completely thought through my views on labels, but I think there's something important there, and we need to start moving towards a label-less being in community.
I think also the labels that have attachments of self-righteousness to them. So when those of us on the left call ourselves progressive, just think of how a conservative listening to us feels about that. You're implying that everything I do and say is not progressive, and that you have the answer to what is progressive. We usually don't know what's really progressive until 20, 30, 50 years later. And even then, we have a little bit of doubts and arguments about what is and isn't progressive. Conversely, if you're a conservative and you say, well, I'm patriotic, I oppose this, I'm in favor of this war, and I would always have, well, who are you to say that you have a lock on patriotism? Aren't the people who opposed the Vietnam War, or one war after the other, aren't they also people who have a lot of patriotism and who wanted the best for their country? And so I think where I see Cassie going with this is, when you start, we'd ask you a different question, which is, what is your best intent? What do you want? What is your hope? What is your dream? Almost always, and how did you learn from your family or from your environment what would create that outcome? When you start from those types of approaches, you hear that almost everybody is on the same page, the page of wanting to do the best they possibly can within the framework of what they know, what they've learned is that. And that's the beginning of the open mind. Thank you.
I know we're time constrained, but would either of you be willing to address your sense of the impact of technology on this whole conversation, to the extent that the whole notion of gender, we're all victims. Modernity is so incredibly oppressive at the level of the success of technology. That's my presumption here, but it just makes us, that's why we all feel sorry for ourselves, and we're all loggerheads. We're abused, and then, but we're both right. That's the point. And a lot of that has to do with the impact of technology. So I know everybody wants to go home, but if you'd indulge me.
I think I won't because of the time.
Okay.
But Cassie, if you want to do that.
Maybe that's something we should all think about as we go home on our drive.
Okay.
I think that's a big
But
topic.
I love it, but it's such a powerful topic that I could spend the next 20 hours on it. I know that Cassie has some DVDs available of the...
In the back room, we'll give a discounted rate of $10 if you want to walk home with one. I have my 3 films dedicated to The Right to Love and The Red Pill available, but limited copies, so get them fast if you want them.
And one of the things that people really respond very well to is the myth of male power in CD form, where I took the highlights of the entire book, had somebody ask me questions about it, so it's like talking to me at a party with my best answers and eliminating my worst answers. And so if you're at all interested in taking this issue to people who were where Cassie was at the beginning of this process, that's really the best device, I would say, for that process. If anything that you buy over there, with my wife and I working with it, if it doesn't work for you, just send it back to me, and my address is on that little piece of paper, and I will be more than sad to return your money.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.